right, I have 3:26, so we've got about 4 more minutes. So I'm just gonna let people join for the next few minutes, okay?
Okay.
Hi, Natalie.
Hello.
Thanks for joining.
Of course. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Good.
So we just opened up the room. We've got about roughly 50 people. We've got almost 500 registered, so we're going to give it until 3:31 or so and get everybody in, okay?
Makes sense.
I love when people put where they're from in the chat because we don't get to see them anymore. So it's great to see where they're coming from. LA, Pasadena, Alameda, we see you. Alhambra, awesome. Vincent, do you want to do your own slides or do you want me to do them and you just tell me when to forward?
It might be easier if I could get you to do them,
Yeah,
and
no
then
problem.
I'll say forward.
Yep, no problem.
Thank you.
Tell me when you want me to advance.
Okay.
Riverside, Madera, LA County, Canberra. Nice, good representation today. Lots of people. Stockton. We've got lots of people. North Hollywood. All right, for everyone who's just joining, we're going to give it until about 3:31, give people a chance to come in. We do have a full training today, so I want to just give a couple of minutes for people to join. Thanks for being here today. All right, for everyone just joining, we're at about 100 attendees. We have almost 500 registered, so we're just going to give it another minute or two for people to join, and then we'll get started. Thanks so much for being here today. Loyola Law School, we see you. Shari Farmer, hi, good to see you. Trinity County, awesome. Sacramento, got people from all over the state, that's awesome. Homies Unidos, awesome, welcome. Great to see so many of you here today. Riverside, Go through the list quickly. Madeira. Wonderful. These trainings have been growing and growing, and people from all over the state coming. It's great to see so many people coming to learn more about working with survivors and all of us learning to do better. That's awesome. All right. It's about 3:31. We've got close to 150 people. So I'm going to go ahead and get started with some overview and introduction. Thank you so much all for being here today. We are here for the training on California victims' compensation. We're going to do a couple of things. We have the California Victims Compensation Board here today. We have Vincent Walker and Natalie Mack. They're going to talk about victims' compensation and really give you the nuts and bolts of the program, what it covers, how do you apply, how does the process work for becoming eligible and getting funded. So all of those will be answered in the beginning of the training. And then the second part of the training, myself and Maria Miguel are going to talk about our experience working with crime survivors broadly and the use of California victims compensation, but also all the other resources that are available and out there when people don't qualify for compensation. So Maria and I will focus in on the survivors that we work with that either don't need the kinds of resources that are available through CalVCB, they don't qualify, or they need additional resources. And Maria, who will introduce herself when we come back on, but she was the supervisor of the claims unit in the San Francisco District Attorney's Office for more than 30 years. She has lots and lots of experience troubleshooting and working on these kinds of cases. And she also led a big reform in the office to decrease the number of denials and really increase the cooperation and collaboration between victim advocates and the claims specialists. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that and how that helped us overcome barriers with survivors and help them to get compensation. And then she has a lot of information about other resources that we use in the community, and I've documented some of those, and we'll talk about those too. So thank you so much for being here. Excited to see you all today. We're at about 165. We still have quite a few people that will be joining, but I don't want to hold us up too long. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce Vincent. And maybe Vincent and Natalie, if you could introduce yourself, and then I will do share screen and pull up our presentation for you both.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Vincent Walker. I am the Deputy Executive Officer over the Victims Compensation Program. In my area is claims processing. I have my folks take care of customer service, so we staff the customer service telephone lines, as well as developing and implementing policy.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Natalie Mack. I am the Chief Deputy Executive Officer over at CalVCB.
Thank you both, and thank you both for being here today to share this information. Really appreciate it. For those of you that have just joined or that are here as participants, two big questions that always come up. Yes, you will receive a PowerPoint. Within a few days, you will get an evaluation emailed to you. We're going to ask you to fill out that evaluation and send it back. And then probably early next week, you will get a copy of the PowerPoints in PDF form. So everyone will get that. The second thing is there's no certificate of completion for the program and no MCLs for this training in particular. Prosecutors Alliance does do some trainings that have MCL, but this is not one of them. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Dr. Gina Castro Rodriguez. I'm the director of the Survivor Resource Training Policy Center for the Prosecutors Alliance and host these trainings once a month. Very happy to have you all here and be part of our series. This is the third in our series. We have a few more coming up before the summer and hope that you'll join us. I'll talk about those at the end. All right, it looks like we've got a number of people, so we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to share screen and then let Vincent and Natalie take over.
Okay, Well, this afternoon, we're going to provide a high-level overview of our program. I joined the board a little better than 6 months ago, so I'm still fairly new, getting a lot of information, a lot of processes down. Very, very happy to be here. So I also asked Natalie if she would join me and so we can answer any questions and clarify any information that may come up in our discussion today. So Gina? What we're going to cover today is what we do as a program, who can apply, and kind of what is covered. Moving right along, we are the oldest victims compensation board in the US. The program was created in California back in 1965. And what we do is we provide financial assistance to those victims of crime. We work with community partners, both system-based and community-based advocates. And we have a lot of staff and managers that are dedicated to helping victims who unfortunately had to go through a major event or some type of crime. We serve those folks, those residents of California, and anyone who has who visited California and unfortunately were a victim of a crime. We partner with 17 county processing offices. So we have staff that are located in Sacramento at our headquarters office. And we also partner with what we call our joint powers offices. Those are staff that we contract with to help us process applications as well as bills. And we also have 22 restitution programs throughout the state that assist us with restitution recovery and also with processing some of the program requirements that we have. Where we get our funding from is obviously restitution orders, restitution fines, penalty assessments, and a large portion comes from the Federal Victims of Crime Act, as well as the California General Fund. We're going to talk a little bit about how to apply. We have several ways that our applicants apply. They can apply online. We do have an online portal where they can go in and establish and register an account and complete an online application. They can also download an application, complete it, and either fax it into us or mail it directly into us. Those folks who may need a little additional assistance can call our customer service line, and we'll help them through the application process as well as send one to them. And then we also have advocates in the field, you know, yourselves and several others who work with victims to complete the application. Our customer service line as well as our website is also listed on this information. Our application availability, we have 14 different languages that our application comes in. Once a claimant or applicant identifies a language outside of English that they would prefer being communicated with, after the application is received, all additional communications will be sent to them within their requested language. What we ask our advocates and our authorized representatives, they may be the folks who assist with completing the applications. If for any reason they receive a denial or request for additional information, we work with the advocates or responsive representatives to gather additional information that we may need specific to crime reports, bills, and some relocation forms. We also are able to stay in contact with the, in many cases, we may lose contact with the application. In those cases, we work with the advocate to help us remain in contact with the applicant. We allow any person to act as a representative with the exception of a licensed medical and mental health care provider. So the list can be, you know, a family member, a friend, someone from a local assistance center. An advocate can also help assist as far as being a representative for our claimants. Who may qualify? The direct victim, someone who actually is the one who suffered or participated or was involved with a qualifying crime, who received either physical or emotional injury or death. We have a derivative victim, someone who is in close relationship with the victim, or an individual who sustained some kind of monetary loss or injury or death due to the actual crime, or a minor victim or minor witness who maybe had been in close proximity, who may have seen the crime occur or heard the crime while it took place. In those cases, it's usually someone under, it's a victim under the age of 18.
Vincent, we have a couple of questions. Would you like to take them now or hold them to the end?
Sure, we can take them now.
Okay, great. Let me.
I've been answering him in the chat, sorry.
Great. One here says, how does one get access to the advocate portal?
It's on our actual website. So if you go into our website, and I believe it's identified as advocates. And that's how you could access it through there.
Okay, I've got one more, a couple more. It says, it was mentioned if someone is a victim while visiting the state, they're eligible to apply, but they cannot get counseling when they get home unless it's a provider in California. Is that correct?
It's either a provider in California or a provider that may reside and practice in another state that is also licensed to practice in California.
So the issue is licensing, not their location?
Yes.
Okay. And is that something new? That's new for me. No?
No, that's not new.
Okay.
Yeah.
The statute has always been very clear. There have been prior administrations that have administered it differently.
Mhm.
There's currently a proposal in the legislature to make the legislative change, but the statute's very black and white that it has to be this way. If it is updated with the most current proposal, then we would be allowed. But right now we're barred by statute from that.
Okay, but there is a legislative proposal to fix that right now? Okay.
There is.
Great, because that'd be really important for visitors. I mean, we have big, we're a big tourist state, and so we probably have a lot of people that come here and then are victims of crime. Thank you for that question, Melissa. Another one is, are the forms for relocation, disability, vehicle, reply, etc., available in all languages? I believe I've only seen a few in Spanish, not other languages.
So we worked with a translation services to ensure that the communication that we have with those folks are in the language that they prefer. So yes, it is available, but that's upon request and identifying that they would prefer the actual form or documentation in a language besides English.
And can you clarify, Vincent, is that the survivor that asks for that, or can the advocate also ask for that?
The advocate could ask for it on behalf of the survivor, yes.
Okay. All right, and just a couple more. We're getting lots of good questions. I suggested updates over a year ago on the human trafficking claims, and these have not been updated. For example, human trafficking does not even appear on the drop-down list.
So that's unfortunately not accurate. That is something that has been updated. It was a very good suggestion at the time, and it has been updated. If you go into the website, which I put in our as a response to one of the questions, the victims.ca.gov. If you go into the victims, human trafficking is now in fact a drop down, and we're continuously populating with resources related to that topic.
Great, thank you. Thank you for clarifying that. Another question, with regard to who qualifies, are Good Samaritans also eligible?
Yes. There is a statutory scheme surrounding that. So there's specific criteria as to what will qualify you as a Good Samaritan and what you have to submit. But yes, there is a Good Samaritan clause as well.
Okay, so if you come to the aid of a survivor or if you intervene, then you could also be eligible?
Well, if you come to the aid of a survivor, potentially. It would depend on what the facts of surrounding what happened are, but yes.
Okay. Is there anything that would disqualify someone if they were a Good Samaritan?
So each one is going to be assessed independently. There's not, it's not a fill in the blank kind of thing. And most of the Good Samaritan things are more like natural disaster type things. Someone is drowning and you jump in and you're able to, it's harder because they have to be a victim of a crime and you have to be assisting without becoming part of the crime. So there's usually a declaration. I'd have to pull up my statute book and I can do that as you guys proceed. But as you, the statute requires a declaration. It's either from not law enforcement, it might be from the AG's office. I'll pull it up for you, but we don't make the independent assessment. We have to have that component in place because they make the determination on what a Good Samaritan is. We just compensate it.
Thank you very much, Natalie.
I also did find, just for you guys, it's Senate Bill 877 introduced by Eggman. That is the one that would authorize CalVCB to reimburse mental health providers who are licensed out of California.
That's
So
an
currently, yeah, 877 introduced by Eggman, EGGMAN. I'll put it in the chat.
Thank you very much for sharing that.
No problem.
Another question, are victims of domestic sex trafficking eligible for services and funding? If so, what proof is needed to apply?
So I'm sorry, Vincent. I had
No, go right ahead.
Vincent did, so some of these are probably right off the top of my head. I apologize. Did you want to take it or do you want me to take it?
No, go ahead.
Okay.
Yes.
So for sex trafficking, much like human trafficking, there are declarations available either by a mental health worker. There's a couple of scheme criteria in statute that allow us, but it does not require a police report if that's the question. There's several different ways to kind of qualify. It's usually by declaration though.
Okay. And some of the examples that I've used with survivors in the past have been a mental health provider, someone from a health provider, like maybe seeking medical assistance, or it could be a certified service provider. So someone providing services for human trafficking. All right, the next question. Hello, what are the legal requirements for one to qualify? Do they need to be US citizens or residents?
Residents, yes. US citizenship does not disqualify you for our program.
Okay. Can you tell me how do they show proof of residency?
Where you live in California, you have to show that you're a resident of California. Usually it's sometimes it's a driver's license, sometimes it's a housing, proof of your home location. It's usually just disclosed. We don't investigate it, but people typically tell you I was either visiting or I live here. It's just their address of record.
Great, thank you. Next question is, does the applicant have to have a police report in order to receive financial assistance?
Depends on the crime. Not all crimes require a police report. What we have to be able to do is substantiate that a crime occurred. So a lot of times domestic violence doesn't require, sexual assault doesn't require. There are alternate paths to determine that. But because we don't just compensate injury, but rather injuries associated with crimes, we have to be able to prove that element. So it just depends on the crime. It is not required for all compensation.
And the next one is, what is the statute of limitation?
With regard to just filing an application, right now it's within 7 years is the timeliness component, but it's not really the statute of limitation in the sense that you can, with good cause, file late.
It says, I'm seeing a lot of negative reviews of Cal VCB online. Can you speak to that?
No, I would have to know. I mean, I would need to know more specifically what the commentary was. I do know that prior administrations have done things a little differently, some of which were audited findings, and we had to do some things differently when this administration came in. I don't know if that's the impetus for it, but absent a very specific complaint, I wouldn't be able to address that.
Yeah, and we're grateful to have both Vincent and Natalie here today. So if you have specific questions, I'm sure they're happy to answer those. But we need to know, sort of what is the area that you're interested in.
Yes.
And the last one here in the Q&A I have, for domestic violence victims, do they require all police reports, or can the most recent incident be enough?
It's case by case, but I would suspect the most recent would be enough.
And just checking the chat, there's some questions there too. Are fentanyl overdose deaths considered a crime? And are their family members eligible for services?
Ooh, this one's tricky. So this is one of the ones that's currently up for lots and lots of discussion. Typically overdoses are not considered crimes. They're typically considered cases where the person was involved, for lack of a better word, because they overdosed. I know there's a lot of discussion on the legislative floor as to whether that's something that should be changed or amended, but in its current state, most overdoses, unless forced, like physically forced, are not considered to be eligible.
So good news is we have a ton of questions, so I'll keep reading. Cal VCB is not a cure-all. It helps and acts as a safety net. Also, the criteria is very specific about cooperation through trial. Okay, that was just a comment. Question, is police shooting included for the family? Is police shooting included for the family?
As in, if the police shoot someone, is the family eligible for compensation?
Yes, I think that's the question.
If it's determined that the shooting was not justified, there have been some cases, but typically a lot of what is involved with police is done within the construct of their jobs. And so I don't see a whole lot of those where the police are, unless the DA has referred and said this was an unjustifiable shooting or an unjustifiable punishment. In that case, then yes, they would be.
Would that also be if the DA is charging a case against a police officer, or
Yes.
would we have to wait till the outcome of that case happens?
Potentially just the charge alone.
Okay. Thank you. This is asking if you can please repeat the time frame. I believe they're talking about the 7 years that you have to apply for compensation. And correct me if I'm wrong, Natalie, if you're 18, do you have 7 years past your 18th birthday? Is that how it works?
Yes,
Okay. So for minors, you have 7 years past the 18th birthday.
correct.
Is there a manual or document that states these details and processes for victims, advocates, and mental health providers, so that all we need to do is look up the laws and regulations?
So there are statutes that are available to everyone, and then internally we have manuals that our processors use, but that's not a public document. The statutes are in fact public documents.
So the qualifications and the limitations, the things we're talking about today are public information. And then much like an insurance adjuster, maybe the people that work at Cal VCB are looking at those regulations and then evaluating a claim, correct?
Correct, yes.
When it comes to officer involved shootings, what are the parameters for eligibility for the decedent as well as for bystanders?
The hardest part for this is we have to get a district attorney's office to determine that this is in fact an unjust shooting. So I don't have a lot of examples of this at this point in time, so I couldn't exactly create a crib sheet of any kind, because we don't see these very often.
This next question, who should we contact to obtain forms in different languages? They're not available in the publication section on the website or in the Cal VCB manual.
You can call our customer service line and they can order. Vincent, I don't have the number. This is your area. This is one I won't be able to tell you. I'm looking it up right now, but I don't know this one off the top of my head. But customer service, if you call them, they can coordinate.
And if you're writing it down, it's a toll-free number. It's 800-777-9229.
Okay, I'm putting that in the chat now.
Okay, I was looking for the question in the chat so I could write it. So you're good.
Here's another one. I was told that only a DA advocate can create an advocate account. Is that true?
DA advocate. I
So
do
there-
not.
I guess they're saying if they're a community advocate, are they also able to create an advocate account on the website?
That I don't know.
I believe so. Yes, it's individual to, I think, the person who establishes the account. As far as the community one, if they're looking to do advocacy for multiple different peoples, I'm not for sure. We'd have to find that out and get it back to you.
I think what the impetus behind the question is there's some components that if you are an advocate that is in a victims witness center in a district attorney's office that coordinates with CalVCB, you may have more access than a community-based advocate. You may have more functionality available to you because we share files and things like that. But I would have to have Vincent check into that. I'm not certain.
Yeah, I would be interested if you're a community advocate, let's say you're a domestic violence advocate, you work for an advocacy agency, maybe providing services. Can you create an account and help survivors apply that way? So if we get that confirmed, that would be great.
Okay.
Is there a course available currently for victim advocates?
Yes. Oh, sorry, go ahead. Vincent.
We have we don't have just one course. Right now we have a schedule where we offer courses or a topic every month. This month, I think the training is on Thursday, March the 10th, and the topic, I believe, is relocation. So each month we identify a topic that we're going to cover with our advocacy group, and we send out notifications throughout the month and asking folks to register for those. So we do have training. It's not just one course, and we roll it out throughout the year.
Would one of you mind putting the link to that in the chat? Seems like people are interested in that. And getting on the list for the trainings, it sounds like too.
Yes, I'll put it in there.
Okay. Is the DA's office the primary office which determines whether victims of officer-involved shootings are eligible? And what about internal affairs or adjacent departments that also investigate officer-involved shootings and their findings? Would their findings be taken into consideration?
They would. It's just very difficult to get your hands on those reports.
So if it were for instance, a police accountability office,
Mhm.
that information could be taken into consideration?
Correct. If we could get the reports of it, yes. I do know that there was some legislation on the floor last year to try to address officer-involved shootings and just police violence in general as a compensable crime. It stalled a bit. It didn't go away, but it's not currently in legislation that way. So it has to be something we can identify as a crime.
Yeah, so that's SB 299, which
That's correct.
Prosecutors Alliance supports.
Yes.
Let's see. There's an officer-involved shooting that was charged in San Francisco against Kenneth Cha. Will the decedent's family have access to services? If so, what services are available for them?
Say that again. I'm sorry.
It says there's an officer-involved shooting that was charged in San Francisco against Kenneth Cha.
Okay.
Will the decedent's family have access to services? And if so, what services are available to them?
I mean, that's very specific. I don't know if anyone's applied, but potentially, and if they were eligible, then they would be eligible for the same benefits as any other victim, which would be up to the 70,000, including funeral, burial, medical, dental, mental health, relocation, all the gamut as specified in statute.
Thank you. Oh, there are a lot of questions here. Does being a victim of a DUI accident or hit and run qualify for CalVCB?
Hit and run, yes. DUI, potentially. So if you get into, if you're the passenger in a car and someone is driving under the influence, then potentially not, because you got in the car with someone who was known to be under the influence. If you're in the other vehicle and someone hits you by way of DUI, then yes.
Interesting. So if a child's parent was killed in a hit and run, would that qualify a child for funding?
If a child's parent, they would have to have a representative, but yes, they would be eligible for benefits as a derivative victim.
Okay. And sorry, let me move down to the bottom. Seems to be some more. Yes, we're going to finish the general overview. We just wanted to get to some of these questions. SB 299, the legislation we posted in the chat. Can a victim wait to use relocation services? Will they be questioned why they did not move immediately?
So relocation is meant to address an imminent threat. So part of what's required for relocation is some sort of declaration that indicates you need to be moved in the interest of safety to preserve your safety. So if it were a prolonged period, there would very likely be a challenge for the fact that you no longer potentially have an imminent threat.
Okay, we're going to pause the questions for a moment and go back to the presentation, and then we'll come back and I'll get as many questions as I can.
Okay, moving right along. Great questions, everyone. The next topic we were talking about, or we want to share some information on, are the types of qualifying crimes. Now, this is not a comprehensive list, but it is a list of the most common ones that we see as an organization on a regular basis. So vehicle-related crimes, we had a few questions on that. Homicide, domestic violence, sexual assault, robbery, and burglary. Burglary, the applicant has to be present at the time that the burglary actually occurred. So, okay, Gina.
Okay. And the terrorist threats, stalking, bullying, those are all also?
Yes.
Oops, sorry.
Some of it as eligibility requirements, there has to be a physical injury or a threat of a physical injury, along with emotional injury. And those are in certain crimes like domestic violence, sexual assault, and death. We had some questions about eligibility requirements, timeliness. It is 7 years from the date that the crime actually occurs. There is some potential that if it is past that 7-year time requirement, that based on the reason, late good cause may be considered. We would have to know the circumstances around that. Residency in California, documentation that a crime actually occurred. We usually get that through law enforcement in the form of a crime report. We're looking for the applicant to provide cooperation with not only the board, but law enforcement in the event there is an investigation that occurs. And the last one is regarding involvement. And that one really talks about whether or not you were involved in the actual crime that was perpetrated upon you. So we look at that as well. There may be some mitigating circumstances, but that's a definitely eligibility requirement.
I imagine we'll have some questions about that, and because that's a subjective assessment based on your regulations, correct?
No, not subjective. Yeah.
Okay.
You want to answer those questions now?
Let's go ahead and do that.
Okay, give me one
There you
moment.
go.
Let's see. For relocation assistance, can the victim have family members move in with them in a new place, or do they need to inform VCB if they plan to have someone move in?
If the person's with them when they're moving, like if a family is moving, then the presumption is the family is moving. If you're trying to move from one place and you're moving in with a roommate, you're entitled to your portion of it. So there's some nuance there, but we don't designate who's moving. We're just moving the person in particular, or the family in general, for purposes of safety.
What percentage of applications were approved last year?
I have to pull it up. That's not something I have off the top of my head.
For sex trafficking and labor trafficking victims who are requesting compensation for salary, is a police report required?
No,
Can a survivor of domestic violence be compensated or reimbursed for rental assistance after she has moved?
I don't understand the question. Can they be compensated?
They've
How?
already moved and now they want to be reimbursed for the expenses they spent on the move, I'm imagining.
If you move for purposes of safety and you're otherwise, if you can prove that you meet the relocation requirement, then yes, absolutely.
I think we're caught. Oh, I'm sorry, cooperation. Would a
That's-
victim of sex trafficking be deemed cooperative because the act was performed?
No. That's spelled out in statute as well, no.
Great, thank you. Okay, Vincent, you ready for me to go to the next slide?
Yes. So eligibility benefits. The overall limitation for a claim is a maximum of $70,000. That's for income loss, relocation, medical or mental health services. So we do work with that $70,000 limitation right there. The benefit has to be directly related to the crime. So if you are ill or you have some mental stuff going on, we look for our medical provider to inform us the percentage that it's related to the actual crime. If there's some other underlying conditions or something else is going on and the services aren't directly related to the crime, benefits may be reduced to the percentage that is actually related to the crime. We are the payer of last resort. So if there's another source of reimbursement, they have to exhaust that source first before they can be compensated by our program. They cannot be on parole, probation, or post-release during the time that they would receive benefits. And property loss is not covered. So eligibility benefits, here are some of the limits. We've got medical or dental, mental health, funeral, burial, relocation. These are the figures that we're working with right now. We've gotten some feedback that they appear kind of low in some areas, and we are working with our legislature to take a look at some potential increases, but these are the limitations that we're working with as a program right now.
And we pay about 84, or we approve about 84%. So somebody had asked the question about what's their approval rate. It's about 84%.
Thank you.
Mhm.
We also pay for equipment that is medically related to the actual crime that occurred. So if there's a need for a wheelchair, a medical bed, walkers, respirators, we do cover the cost of those as well. Even to the point of telecommunication devices for the deaf or hard of hearing. We cover many, many funeral and burial expenses. And this is not a complete list, but if there is documentation that another type of service was provided or occurred for the final arrangements of someone, we do cover that as well. We look at other types of potential religious acts that occur, and those, if disclosed, may be eligible for reimbursement as well. The documentation that we need is some kind of contract between whoever we're making the arrangements, some kind of monetary contract. We definitely look at every receipt that we get. And whatever documents that could prove that an expense occurred, we look at that for reimbursement as well. For relocation, we look at a report where law enforcement has deemed it necessary for you to relocate, as well as a mental health provider documentation that states for safety purposes, it is required that they relocate. We look at the expense form verification in the form of a lease agreement or some kind of contract that says you agree to pay, a landlord or someone who's renting a new living arrangements with you as proof that you have actually relocated and the amount of the expense. Once again, our limitations are up to $2,000. We pay rent, we pay the deposit, we look and see if there's an expense with the moving company. There's utility connections. Sometimes personal belongings has to be stored until they can get from one place to another. And expenses, any other expenses, we do require documentation that those expenses actually occurred and are related to the actual relocation before we will reimburse. The next one is income loss and who is eligible for that. The direct victim, employed at the time of the crime, they had to have been receiving some type of employment or income prior to becoming a victim. We look at their wages at the point that they suffered or became a victim, as well as we go back and look at prior income tax returns, W-2s to verify income. We also look at human trafficking. This is a little bit different because this is an area where the loss of wages were due to them being a human traffic victim, as opposed to them missing out on the wage because they were either sick or ill or unable to actually work. The adult derivative victim is either the parent or legal guardian of a minor victim. And if there's an income or support loss in that area, they may be eligible for reimbursement or income loss and support there. Once again, our maximum benefit is up to $70,000. And if the loss of income is beyond 5 years, they have to have something submitted to us by a medical provider saying that they've become permanently disabled. But we still would only pay up to that 5-year period of time, or the $70,000 maximum benefit.
So the $70,000 maximum is all the eligibility areas combined. It's not like 70,000 for income loss, 70,000 in the other things, right? It's a $75,000 maximum per person, correct?
70, yes.
70, sorry.
Yes.
And can you tell me, do you know what percentage of claims hit that maximum in a given year, like last year? What percentage of claims are maxing out at that 70,000?
So what I'll tell you is that's a hard question because once you're eligible for life.
Okay.
So while I could tell you, 2 or 3% may have maxed out last year, those 2 or 3% may have been 15, 20 years old, and they just throughout the course of time hit the maximum. So it's a little bit different. Every once in a while we have anomalies where someone will max out all in 1 year, but that's usually because they've been in an accident, they're quadriplegic, they have to have their vehicle retrofitted or their home retrofitted where it's the bulk all at once. But typically like mental health sessions being done at 100, whatever pop takes a very long time to max. So it's a little bit skewed of a statistic.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for explaining that.
No problem.
Okay, support loss. In order to be eligible for support loss, the claimant must have been a spouse of the deceased victim or a legal dependent. The victim had to be employed at the time that it occurred. And those folks who are eligible is either a spouse, a child, or an incompetent adult.
Can I ask a question about people that are employed without documentation? So we have many people that are employed that are being paid under the table, or day laborers, things like that. What kind of documentation can they provide for their employment?
If there's no proof of wage loss, then we can't compensate it. If they've got pay stubs, if they've got, we have to be able to prove that component. While we'd still be eligible for benefits like medical, dental, mental health, specific to wage loss, we have to be able to prove that, we have to be able to validate the wage loss. Not necessarily the Social Security of the person, but we do have to be able to validate the wage loss. So there are some instances where some people who are undocumented are unable to take advantage of that benefit if we can't validate a wage loss.
Thank you.
Okay, when it comes to residential security, some of the expenses that we will cover are, alarms and keypads, installation costs, monitoring costs, windows, bars and security doors, or replacement or new locks. We're not able to reimburse for, say, weapons, guard dogs, or any like self-defense courses, but to cover the other expenses specific to installation and monitoring costs, we do look at contracts and we do look at receipts to confirm and reimburse those costs. Next one is crime scene cleanup. We would cover costs that it would take to clean up a crime that occurred inside of a house or a vehicle. The service provider must be registered with the Department of Public Health as either a trauma scene waste or a management practitioner. So, a trauma scene waste management practitioner. They have to be registered with the Department of Public Health before we would cover the reimbursement costs for the services that they provided. And once again, we look at either the bill that they provided or any receipts associated with the work that they perform. The reimbursement and recovery sources that we look at before we step in and reimburse are life insurance, workers' comp, any civil suits, homeowners or rental insurance, vehicle insurance, disability, death benefits, and any trust funds. So we look to see if any of those benefits were available prior to us stepping in and pay. And once again, we are the payer of last resort. So we look for those benefits to be exhausted and utilized before we are able to provide any benefits as well.
I know we have a lot of questions, and I'll wait till the end because I want to make sure that everyone gets their questions in. But on a civil suit, so we may not know for a long time that there's a civil suit. What happens if someone receives compensation up front and then later they win a civil suit?
There's a soft lien that's placed. So if we're aware, we have a system that runs in our background that shows open claims and open lawsuits and things like that. And our legal department will file a lien so that if that case settles, we're able to try to request reimbursement if it's applicable. I'm trying to answer these questions as quick in the chat as fast as they come. Are you able to see the answers, or should I stop doing? Okay, good. I am trying, but you guys are faster than me. There's more of you.
Okay.
So this slide provides a little bit of information about our application numbers and the days it's requiring us to process both applications and bills. We have received feedback many times that it appears that it's taken longer and longer to hear back from our program. So we've really had a concerted effort to try to get those benefits and services to, the needed applicants as soon as possible. So these are the days that it's really taken us to process applications and get benefits out to those applicants, as well as pay reimbursement to bills to our medical providers, our mental health providers, as well as our applicants.
So there's a pretty significant decrease in total applications process between 2021 and 21-22. Any thoughts of what's caused that? That's 100% difference.
For the 21-22, we're not through the year just yet, so that's
okay.
it.
All right, that makes sense. Okay, thank you.
Okay. So anytime we issue a denial to an applicant, they do have appeal rights. They do need to file an appeal within 45 calendar days from the date that we send the denial notice. And we do have appeal forms that they can use, as well as if they want to write us a note or use another form to communicate with us outside of our appeal form, they can contest the denial, as well as submit any additional supporting documentation that may have us reconsider the actual determination. We have done, like Nadia had said earlier, a lot of work on our website, and we're asking and pointing people to pretty much self-help options, and a lot of the information that we discussed today is on our website. We do have a portal specifically set up for our advocates. We do have a lot of information out there answering many questions that our applicants have. So anytime that you're not able to connect directly with someone from Cal VCB, our website is an excellent source of information. And lastly is just really the contact information. This is our general customer service line and the telephone number to our outreach and public affairs department. If there is a request that you would like us to appear and provide some general information to a group in your area or someone else that wasn't able to attend your meeting today, we can set up some information sharing sessions or listening sessions through our public affairs line.
Great.
As well as this is my contact information. If you have questions directly from me or questions real specific to an applicant or a claimant, then you can get them to me, and then we'll see what we can do as far as responding to them or providing additional services to the applicant that you're representing. And that concludes it.
We have some questions, if you don't mind. I'll read some of them. If a victim changes addresses while they wait for their VCB mail, who do they contact to update their mailing address?
They can contact customer service.
How do you get access to the victim advocate portal? I just checked the Cal VCB website and I don't see an option to create an account.
Oh. Let me look at that and I'll get back with you.
Thank you. I know it was stated that property loss is not covered. Is that jewelry, vehicle, motorcycle? Just need more clarity, please.
Say it again differently.
It says, so they're asking if jewelry, vehicles, motorcycles, would those be covered as property?
Yes, those are property and they're not covered.
And they're not covered. So no property is covered.
Property is not covered. That's correct.
If a victim is homeless and only receiving general relief but needs a home to get away from the perpetrator, what can Cal VCB do?
So again, Cal VCB being a reimbursement program is somewhat limited in that regard. There are resources, and if they can go somewhere and it incurs a pecuniary loss, that we can be we can reimburse it, but we don't have like a placement program where we would find the housing and then place someone. You'd have to independently find the housing that you needed to go to, tell us what you needed. There are some instances where emergency housing is available, but that's typically very, 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 very short term, because right now statutorily there's a $2,000 limit that goes very quickly. So I have seen instances where people have been put into hotels for very short periods, but you're looking at days. You're not looking at a long-term solution in those instances.
Yeah, and the challenge that we'll talk about this, but when you have someone that you're working with that's unhoused, and even if we use the $2,000 to relocate them, they'd have to keep paying for that moving forward, which is not always an option.
Correct.
This question is, would Ring and Blink count for security costs? So like the Ring camera on your door or a Blink system?
They have in the past, yes. I've seen circumstances where people have submitted receipts for those.
And when you said property loss is not covered, does that mean that the victim of violent carjacking, for example, cannot recover the cost of the stolen car or any damages to the car or property inside?
No, that would be their or their car insurance policy that would cover it. We don't cover damages to that extent. We would cover the damage to the person, but not the property.
And can you please repeat the relocation information? Do victims need both law enforcement and mental health evidence to prove that they need to relocate for safety reasons?
No. I have to pull the statute to be very specific, but it does not always require both. Give me a second. You can actually keep going and I will circle back as soon as I find it.
Great. This one says advocate portal stipulates victim witness advocate, create a new account. What you will need to create a new account: current victim advocate with a victim witness center, CalBCB victim advocate PIN and email address. So there's no access to the portal for a community organization that provides advocacy. This is problematic because plenty of victims do not like to deal with the resources linked to the law enforcement or DA's offices and prefer to work with community organizations that they feel they receive better support and services.
So I am looking at the page right now. I'm not as familiar with the advocate page. So there are, yeah, I'm not as familiar with this page. So I do see a representative request form, but as far as establishing an account, I'm not seeing the information for that. So I'll have to get back to the group on how to do that.
Thank you. I've got a few more. Can the funds be used towards insurance deductibles?
No. No, that's not a pecuniary loss, and your deductible. So we ran into, you mean like Cobra or Coben or, yeah, no, the statute doesn't allow for that.
If we provide, oh, sorry, go ahead.
So we can pay the cost of the medical reimbursement directly, but Coben costs and Cobra costs, what we find a lot of is those cover your whole family potentially, and not just the injured party. And it gets very, very messy. We did run it up through legal at one point in time to get clarification, and we do not have statutory authority for that.
If we provide mental health services and do not bill to their insurance, how can we show this to support payer of last resort process?
So that again, if you provide services, but you don't bill the insurance, they have insurance and you don't bill it?
Yes.
So if a claimant indicates that they have insurance, then we will ask for the insurance denial or some sort of proof, because as a payer of last resort, that's our fiduciary responsibility. If they say they don't have it, then we don't have a reason to hunt it down. But if it's disclosed that they have it, or we learn in the process that they have it, pursuant to the statute of us being payers of last resort, we need them to exhaust that. Now, there are some instances where people who have insurance can still get benefits through CalBCB. Maybe they have insurance and their insurance doesn't want to cover something, or they've expended all of their, a lot of what we also see of someone who has insurance, their insurance doesn't pay a portion. So they have, it covers a certain amount, we pay the difference. But we do, if you have insurance, require you to go through your insurance first.
Regarding homelessness, I had a DV victim that became homeless with 2 children for a year. The social worker was able to document her shelter care stays, and with assistance from another agency, we're able to help with relocation. It was a lot of research and documentation, but we did it. Just a statement. Let's see. Related question to the property question. When you said property loss is not covered, does that mean that a victim, oh, that, we've already read that one. Okay, I think we may have gotten all the questions. Let me just check the Q&A one more time. Is unpaid time of off work to undergo a rape kit, meet with investigators, and testify in court reimbursable as income loss?
Yes.
And I think that's it. Thank you both so much for staying in and answering so many questions. As you can see, there's a lot of interest in the program and understanding the intricacies of it. We'd be very interested in sharing the information with this group about your upcoming trainings. So happy to share that when we share the PowerPoints in a few days, if you can provide that to us.
Definitely will. And if we don't have you on a mail or distribution list, let me know and we'll definitely get your email and contact information for all our future trainings and webinars.
What we'll also do is, and I don't know if it's best to get it back to you, the question as it relates to getting on the advocate portal, as well as the patterns for qualifying for relocation. I'm happy to kind of spell those out and send. It'd be best to send them back to you, Jeannie, to get them back to
That
the
would be great. That'd be great. And then I'll make sure I include it with your presentation and I'll send it all out together.
Perfect. We're happy to do that.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you, Vincent and Natalie. Really appreciate you coming today and sharing all this information about California Victims Compensation Board.
You're very
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right, everyone, we're going to switch gears just a little bit. Maria, Miguel, and I are going to talk a little bit about what do we do when people either don't qualify, so we're not even applying for victims compensation, or they have needs that are outside of things that are reimbursable by victims compensation. So we're going to talk about some work that we did in San Francisco around this. Maria, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. So my name is Maria Miguel, and I was the supervisor of the Victim Compensation Unit in San Francisco. I worked there 30 plus years, and I recently left in December. And the time that I was there, we were able to help a significant number of people, working closely with our advocates, and also having my team come together and basically brainstorm and have claims discussion issues to see how we can overcome any potential issues that the claims had. So we were very successful with that.
Great. And we're going to fortunately talk about some of those today. So thank you, Maria. All right, I'm going to share screen and go to our presentation now. All right. So we're going to talk about some of the barriers and challenges identified by survivors in applying for, accessing, and securing resources. We're going to demonstrate some tips and tools for helping survivors successfully access victims' compensation. So some of the things we did to decrease our denial rates and increase our eligibility rates for survivors. And then we're going to offer some additional resources and recommendations for financial assistance to survivors who don't fall within either the qualifications for CalVCB or the expenses that they need covered are not part of what's covered under CalVCB. All right. So some of the common barriers and challenges. We have done 2 big studies around survivors in the last 2 years. The first was called Survivor Impact Study, which was done by myself and Paige Almendinger while we were at the San Francisco District Attorney's Office, where we surveyed over 500 survivors of crime about their interactions with the criminal justice system, with District Attorney's Office, and their experience accessing resources and supports in their recovery and healing. I'll put a link to that at the end of the end of the session if you'd like to take a look at that. And then the second is a research study that we're working on right now called Survivor Voices. For the last several months, we've been engaging with crime survivors from all over California through 3 different venues. The first was listening sessions where we virtually came together with groups of crime survivors to talk about their experience and mostly focused on accessing resources and services that aided in healing and recovery. We also did some live listening sessions in Los Angeles and San Francisco with groups of survivors where we asked the same questions about their experience, the trajectory of their traumatic experience or their crime involvement, and then where they were in their healing process and what are some of the things that helped. And then the last thing is that we had a large online survey offered in 3 languages, simple Chinese, simplified Chinese, Spanish, and English. And from those 3 different modalities, we have about 762 survivors' voices in this new study where we're pulling some information about their experience. And I'm going to talk about some of those numbers today and what we're learning from crime survivors. So when we ask them what are some of the barriers or challenges to applying for compensation, only a small percentage of survivors apply for compensation and receive compensation. In San Francisco in 2020, we served about 8,000 crime victims and only processed about 850 applications for compensation. So roughly 10% of our survivors met the criteria for compensation, 90% did not. So that takes a lot of work to figure out what else do we do for those survivors who don't apply, can't apply, won't qualify for compensation. So that's where some of our information will come from today. So what are some common barriers expressed by survivors? Reporting the crime. Not everyone immediately calls law enforcement when something happens to them, even if that something is violent, even if that something causes harm to them. And there's a lot of reasons, including prior negative experiences with law enforcement, worry about naming someone or reporting a crime, worry about retaliation, fear for their own safety because of where they live or the proximity to someone who may have caused harm. Maybe the person that caused harm is part of their family and they don't want that person to get in trouble or they don't want to bring law enforcement in. There's a lot of reasons. Cal VCB talked about domestic violence, human trafficking, and sexual assault, and how we don't need a police report for those kinds of cases. There are many types of violence where people don't report for very good reasons, including the traumatic reaction that happens when they are a victim of that kind of crime. And so we know that child abuse, domestic violence, human trafficking, sexual assault, elder abuse, those tend to be relational crimes where the person who is harmed knows the person harming them. And so it's very hard to report those. And so that tends to be the #1 reason people don't qualify for compensation. The second is awareness of victim compensation. So knowing that compensation is even available to them. We're doing this study right now, Survivor Voices. We found that 40% of people didn't know that compensation existed and that they were eligible for it. But when they did apply for compensation, 85% of them received compensation. So when they know about it, they apply and they receive it, but it's knowing about the service. So all of you here today are going to be stewards of this information to take it out into the community and make sure that people know about this resource. Contribution, which Cal VCB spoke to. And so contribution, when it's clearly defined, is that the person in some way was contributing to the crime. Maybe they were in the commission of a crime at the time that they were harmed. That would be deemed contribution. But there's also other nuances to this. So they brought up the example of DUI. That if you knowingly got into a car with someone who had been drinking and then there was an accident, you were harmed, you would not qualify for compensation. That one's really tough. And I actually met with a family in San Joaquin County that this happened to, that the young person got into a car with someone else who had been drinking, got into an accident. That young person was severely harmed in the accident. They were not the driver. They were, but they were harmed and they did not qualify for compensation. And unfortunately, that young person eventually, they succumbed to their injuries from that accident and died, and they were not they were not compensated for funeral and burial, nor did they qualify for medical support. We've also had some other cases that we've triaged over the years, things like, you know, someone walking on the freeway. It's not legal to walk on the freeway. So if someone is walking on the freeway and then they are the victim of a hit and run, that person would not qualify for victims' compensation. So there are a lot of ways that people are engaged in things that are not necessarily committing a crime that could also be contribution. Maria and I just discussed a case that we had several years ago where an elderly man was being followed by someone in a road rage incident. The man was following him. The elderly man did not want to go to his home because he didn't want to take this person back to his home and show him where he lived. So he pulled over and got out of the car. The person following him also got out of the car and beat the elderly man up. The elderly man did not qualify for compensation because he stopped his car and he got out of the car. But we were able to get past that by supporting the elderly person and saying it was reasonable that he was afraid to go home and that he didn't want to bring a dangerous person to his home where his spouse lived. And we were able to get past that. But initially that would have been a contribution issue. And Maria, if you have any other examples we've talked about, please jump in, okay? Cooperation is another difficult one sometimes with survivors. So cooperation is meant so that people will report and that they will assist law enforcement in the investigation of a crime. But because it's subjective, we often find survivors that can't, or it's not appropriate for them to cooperate, or there might be really good reasons why they don't cooperate, and that would also make them ineligible. So an example is we had a survivor that was shot and in a lot of pain, and the police were asking questions about what had happened and about the suspect and some details of the case, and the victim did not want to discuss it with the police at that time, and he was deemed to be non-cooperative. Although I think that most of us could reasonably say that was not an appropriate time to try to get cooperation, it was still deemed as non-cooperative, which meant that we had a lot of difficulties trying to pay medical bills for that person because it is initially cited that way in the police report. Any other examples there you can think of, Maria?
Just to add to that, we would see that quite often sometimes in the police reports in San Francisco, and police would try to interview a victim that had just been shot or injured, and of course they don't want to answer any questions at the moment because they're in agony or pain. And so what we would do is always follow up with a call to the victim and get more information as far as to, you know, why they weren't answering questions and things like that. So we kind of went, we always followed up with the victim to find out their side of the story.
Thank you, Maria. And I want to make sure we get to everything, so I'm going to speed up a little bit. Defined victims. So we've talked a little bit about victims of police violence today. I'll get to that in a moment, but it could also be who's defined on the police report. So we've done a lot of work in San Francisco to train police officers to ensure that they list everyone who is involved and affected at the crime scene on the police report, because if they're not defined as the victim, it can be very challenging, if not impossible, for us to get compensation. So we had a case where there was a drive-by shooting. Two women were standing in their own front yard talking to each other, and one was hit and killed immediately. The other, who was standing next to her, could have also been the victim but was not, watched her friend be shot and killed. And because in the police report, the decedent was listed as the victim, we weren't able to get support even for mental health services for the person that was standing next to her. So very important that everyone affected by the crime is listed on the police report, and that we're advocating for that in our jurisdictions, because that's how we can help them get resources in the future. The other problem with defined victims is that there are a lot of people that are affected by violence that are left out. So people that are determined to be contributing to their crime, people that are determined to be non-cooperative, but also people that are on probation or parole. They would not be eligible for victims' compensation, even if the reasons that they're on probation or parole are not related to this current incident in which they are a victim of violence. So that's one of the things we're trying to advocate for, is to really broaden the definition of who can have access to compensation, because we believe that healing and recovery is important for everyone, regardless of how they were harmed or who harmed them. And so trying to think about the other ways that we provide this support when compensation, formal victims compensation, doesn't cover that. Denials. So I believe that Natalie said 84% of applications are approved. So that's roughly a 16% denial rate. In San Francisco, we took our denial rate from around 10% to 5%, cut it in half. And we're going to talk about some of those strategies today that can be done in jurisdictions to decrease that denial rate. And then the last thing is appeals. Some of the things we heard from survivors is that the appeal process can be lengthy and challenging. We already know that California compensation is a payer of last resort and a reimbursement program. So often when people have been denied, they don't move forward with appealing their claim for eligibility. It's just not something that a lot of people do, but it is a process and it is available to them. And we have seen people win appeals when they come back with more information. Anything else you want to say about appeals, Maria?
Sure. In our office, we didn't have many appeals, but the advocates would assist the clients in writing their appeals and requesting a hearing. And hearing officers would come either to Alameda County or San Francisco County and would meet with clients and have their hearings there. So they had that option at the time.
Thank you. All right, so let's talk about some tools and tips for helping survivors successfully access compensation. The first thing is to have somebody trained in the program support a survivor. So we did a lot of cross training in San Francisco. We trained advocates, claim specialists, attorneys, law enforcement, probation staff, community service providers, and health and mental health providers. So you saw one of the barriers was not knowing about the program. A second barrier is not knowing the details of the program. So the more we can cross-train and have information at multiple points for survivors, the more likely they'll understand the program and then access it. So that's a really important one. I also can't stress enough how important it is to have the support of trained advocates. When someone understands the program, when they help and assist with applications, when they work with law enforcement and they're able to get documentation, they can be a great resource for a survivor. So every county has a victim witness program in either their district attorney's office or in a nonprofit agency. I believe there's 2 in California in a nonprofit agencies. The rest are in the district attorney's offices. And the advocates are trained in this program. And then some counties have the claims program, as San Francisco did. And that's really the best case scenario to understand all the intricacies of the program and what's needed in order for someone to access compensation. So the advocates are able to help them get police reports or information, gather information, help them with an online application. And sometimes the process itself can be re-triggering. So they can also provide some support around that. It can be frustrating or challenging. And unfortunately, a lot of survivors we work with are not computer reading or writing proficient. And so they need assistance in accessing support in applying for compensation. And the last one is a really great program that Maria implemented in San Francisco that I wanted to share with everyone and have her talk a little bit about. So about 7 years ago, she implemented a case review meeting, which, we were trying to bring down our denial rates in San Francisco. We had about a 10% denial rate, and we wanted to cut that in half. And what we did was Maria set up a meeting with her claim specialist, which they brought forward any challenges or any cases that we thought might not be eligible for compensation or that might have some barriers to it. And they would sit around and triage those cases, and together with the experience in the room and the training in the room and looking at the regulations, talk about what kinds of things they could do to get past those barriers. And sometimes that meant working with the advocate on the case. Sometimes that meant them working directly with the victim or with law enforcement, but really trying to figure out how to problem solve those barriers and help get survivors past the things that were preventing them from getting compensation. And like I said, in 1 year's time, we were able to cut our denials in half. Maria, do you want to say anything else about that case review meeting process?
Sure. So like Gina said, we would meet on a weekly basis, and I would ask the specialists to bring any complicated or cases that they had an issue as far as eligibility was concerned. And we would go around the room and discuss it, and they would get input from their colleagues, tips or advice as maybe who to contact, law enforcement, a mental health provider, or contacting the advocate to see how we can overcome the issues. And it was also a good learning tool for new specialists and even older specialists as well, because each and every case is completely different. You're never going to get a case that's the same. So it was very helpful because everything you learned in that room, you could use it, maybe for a future situation you might have. So it was very, very helpful.
Thank you, Maria. And we saw really great success with it. All right, let's talk about additional resources. So in our county, in San Francisco, we were able to come up with some alternatives for compensation in places where people either were not eligible or were not going to apply for compensation. So we started an emergency compensation fund. There's two ways that we got dollars for that fund. One is we went to our board of supervisors and asked for an annual contribution to the fund. I know that may not be possible in all counties, but we were able to make the case that 90% of the people that we were working for either didn't qualify or did not apply for compensation, yet there was still great need. And so we were able to get a pot of money in San Francisco that we could use for things that either were not covered by compensation or for people that didn't qualify for it. But the second thing is that every victim witness organization under a district attorney's office has compensation from Cal OES. We have VOCA and VAWA funds. They're federal funds that come through our state, through the California Office of Emergency Services. And for every one of those grants, you can take a percentage of that grant and put it into an emergency fund for victims. So the amount is 10%. So if you, for instance, have a grant for $100,000 to provide services to domestic violence victims, you could take 10% of that fund and put it into an emergency fund, which is much more flexible and fluid. And you are allowed to create the policies and procedures for paying out of that fund. So when we had this fund, we were able to pay for things that survivors needed, but that wouldn't normally qualify. So things like eyeglasses, medication, clothing, emergency food, gift cards for Safeway or Target for hygiene or food needs. We were able to pay for expenses for pets, if a pet was injured, we could pay for a vet bill, or if a pet needed food because they were also relocating with a family, we could pay for that. A pet deposit, those kinds of things. So it gave us the freedom and flexibility to really look at what the survivor needed in order to rebuild their lives and be able to pay for some of those expenses through this more fluid fund. Another thing that we have done in the past is write grants or get funding specifically for emergency services and emergency funding. So to pay for things like hotel vouchers or grocery cards for people, or transportation, like bus fares, BART fares, those kinds of things. And so sometimes you can find small foundations, or an organization can do fundraising for you if you have a nonprofit arm that can pay for these kinds of expenses. And it's really great to educate either your board of directors or the people that are on your advisory board or people that do the fundraising for you about the needs of survivors that really fall outside of the scope of what's covered in victims' compensation. Because it's a payer of last resort and because it's reimbursement, that means that the person that is a victim of crime has to be pretty stable in order to pay the expenses up front, and then wait to be reimbursed. And for many of you that are working with survivors, you know that that's not a large percentage of the people who are really in need. That the people who really need these funds are people that don't have $10,000 to pay up front for a funeral and then wait to be reimbursed, or they don't have life insurance to cover funeral and burial, and they don't know where these dollars are going to come from. And so for our survivors that are living, more day to day, week to week, month to month, some of those things are out of their reach, and we need grant funding and emergency funding to help pay for that. And then donations are another way to help pay for some of these expenses. Some survivors themselves set up GoFundMe pages or other fundraising pages to pay for things. And unfortunately, we've seen survivors have to do, their own fundraisers like car washes and things to pay for expenses for families. I do want to get to some other expenses some other resources for expenses. So for funeral and burial, there are several things that we've used in the past. Catholic Charities will help pay for some of funeral and burial. The Veterans Administration, if a person was a veteran, there's an allowance for funeral and burial. Social Security pays a very small amount, $255, but it is a small piece of a benefit. And then there's also several organizations that will pay if the decedent is a child. So I've listed the organizations and foundations here that provide money to help with funeral and burial. And then if it is someone that is a foreign national, often the consulates will provide some assistance, more assistance with processing, like sending a body back to a country of origin or helping with family members. But it's really good to reach out to the consulate if somebody is a citizen of another country. For shelter and relocation, we use our crisis response programs in our counties. So connect with your crisis response program, who often have access to immediate and short-term shelters. Also, other nonprofits that are served distinct populations like domestic violence, sexual assault, human trafficking, children, or the elderly. Sometimes they have access to immediate resources like putting people in hotels or getting them into short-term housing. And then there's also a listing here for the shelters and emergency housing throughout California. So I've provided that. When you get this PowerPoint, you'll be able to click through and see it for every county. And then also, please don't forget 211. So 211.org is a resource in every county that can connect you to housing and food and shelters and other information for services needed for survivors. And then for mental health, there's a lot of challenges with mental health and CalVCB. One is just trying to find therapists who will take CalVCB and getting them in and getting them therapy. The issue with the out-of-state therapist has been a really big one because we have a lot of visitors that come here and are victims of crime. So we're going to work to advocate to change that so that people still have access to therapy. But because we have a really high need for therapy right now and a lack of therapists, we're seeing a lot of people that are not accessing mental health. So here are some options. There are 16 trauma recovery centers in California. I've given you the link here. There's a youth crisis text line, which is free and 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for young people. There's a Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration, which is another 24/7 hotline available in English, Spanish. You can call or text. There's a crisis text line in California that is available to all ages. And you text MHA to 741-741. Trevor Lifeline is for LGBTQ youth. They have both chat, text, and phone call. You can call them. There's the Trans Lifeline for transgender people. It's a 800 number available 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. And then there's the Mental Health Services Act Warm Line throughout California, which is peer run by other people with mental health issues who can help direct you to resources. I've also listed mental health resources by county here. So I've given you the crisis lines or the hotlines for every county. And again, this will be given to you in the PowerPoint. And then for some of the crime types that fall outside of these resources are hard to help survivors. There's the Christina Grimmie Foundation, which works with survivors or families of gun violence. And they look at case by case, the needs of survivors, have been really instrumental with helping survivors of gun violence in San Francisco and in some of the big shootings like in Ventura. There's the National Domestic Violence Support Hotline. I've given you that number and the link to the website. The National Human Trafficking Helpline and text, and then the National Sexual Assault Hotline for those of you that need that information. The last thing I'll say before, I'm happy to take a couple questions if people want to stick around. Here's my contact information. And also here is the QR code if you're interested in future trainings. The April training was going to be Survivor Voices. It's actually going to be on Marcy's rights. We are working on that now. So please sign up for that. And we're happy to have you join us. All right, I'm going to look just a few questions, Maria, before we go. Let's see, Q&A. What were some of the outreach methods that you felt were more fruitful when recruiting survivors for listening sessions? Very interesting. So we did them in multiple languages. We provided them in multiple formats. We offered them in mornings, afternoons, evenings, and weekends. So we really tried to be very flexible with meeting survivors anywhere we could, in person, online. We did one-on-one interviews, and we also did surveys. So multiple formats really helped too. RE surveys, how many persons answered the surveys? 762 total responses on our survey. And the survey that we did last year, we had roughly 560. I don't remember the exact number on that one. That will come out in April. And if you are on the list or a member of the Prosecutors Alliance, you will get a copy of that digitally sometime in April. Is unpaid time off? Okay, we've already answered that. All right, let me just check the chat really quickly. Can I give information about the gun violence organization? Yes, it's the Christina Grimmie Foundation. And when you get the PowerPoint, you'll get the link to their foundation, but it's Christina Grimmie. We've also put the link to join the prosecutorsalliance.org. It is free. We encourage you to join so you learn not just about trainings, but the work that we're doing, things like the Survivor Impact Study that will be coming out next month. All you have to do is join and you'll get that stuff in your email and make sure that you're up to date on what we're doing. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming today. I really appreciate your time. I appreciate your great questions and also all the work that you do to help survivors of crime. Please continue to join our trainings. We want to keep providing information that's relevant in your work, and we look forward to seeing you again next month. Thank you, Maria Miguel, for being here today. Thank you all.